Today, I'm very happy to welcome my special guest from all the way in Australia, Samantha Waite. Samantha is the quirky founding director of Taboo Education, who works with individuals and groups in the local, national, and international communities to resolve our taboo, anxiety, and confusion in talking about death. A longtime performing arts enthusiast, Samantha has been praised throughout her career for her engaging and entertaining workshops on challenging and complicated topics. Samantha is a trained counselor and youth worker alongside multiple accreditations in thanatology. Samantha also holds a Bachelor of Social Science, Masters of Counseling and Psychotherapy, and Graduate Diploma of Public Health. And you can learn more about all of Samantha's work at the website tabooeducation.com. So, Samantha, welcome and thanks for joining me.
Karen, thanks for having me.
It's always, well, it always amazes me that we're able to even connect like this from such a great distance, and I feel really grateful that it's happening.
I know a few years ago, no one would have been used to doing this.
Yeah, just to be able to compare notes between Australia and the US and to come together and chat about it. So I'm really grateful. So I was hoping you would just tell us more about your story and how you ended up becoming interested in death studies and then creating taboo education.
So I, straight out of school, went on to do my studies to become a psych. So I always knew I wanted to do that, but originally I was going to go down the sexology path and deal with sexuality, sexual fetish, that kind of thing. And then realized very quickly that I'd have to move to the eastern states, so on the other side of our country, and I didn't particularly want to do that. So I ended up doing grief counselling, and so that was phenomenal. And then COVID came around. I had been helping to look after my grandmother, who was in her 90s at the time, so I saw the aging process. I saw what happened in aged care facilities, how families interacted or rather didn't interact with their aging loved ones, how the structure of the homes sort of impeded on a lot of that. So that was part of it. Also, I kept getting asked through grief counselling the same questions about death over and over and over again. Anyway, so I got burnt out around COVID time, and I thought, well, I'll start. I'd love to start to be able to talk about it, to be a guest speaker, to talk about all these death issues. And I thought, how am I going to do that? And so during COVID, I brought that up and I started the YouTube channel to help people, to help anyone, even people that couldn't afford to come to workshops and things like that. So that's really where that came from, and I wanted to be proactive about it. There's something about grief counselling that is reactive, and as it should be, that obviously has its place. But I wanted to be proactive around trying to get kids and adults to talk to each other about death and normalize it back to how it was maybe 100 years ago, before the funeral industry and the medical industry sort of got involved, perhaps over involved in our dying process.
So that's how you ended up doing this and creating all of this. But I wanted to ask you for those who are just listening to the podcast, you can't see Samantha, but those on the YouTube channel can see that you wear a Victorian hairstyle and Victorian dress, and I'm just really curious about that and hope that you'll tell us
Yeah,
why.
sure. I'd like to say it's historically inspired, in no way historically accurate, because I know the comments is going to come at you. Um, so I was the goth kid in teenage rebellion, I suppose, back in the day, and that was, oh, good Lord, many. I'm in my mid 30s now. For anyone who's only listening to this, so I started with that. Realized very quickly that the particular type that I was in, I didn't like, so I got into, but it got me interested in corsets, things like that. I wanted to go into a more historically inspired way, so that got me into more the Victorian mourning wear. And Victorian mourning wear got me interested in the Victorian era and how we how things are different. It changed so suddenly for us over here in Australia about how we went around death. But why I look like this, I don't know. I've probably since my early 20s I've been dressing like this. So this is very normal. This isn't something that I think about when I put on during the day. You put on a pair of pants, I put on a skirt. You put on a
Hmm.
blouse, it takes about 30 seconds to do my hair. Um, yeah, it's something that I'm comfortable with. It's how I feel my most confident, and it's a nice quirk. And when it came to business, you want branding. You want to be able to someone to remember you, and this just happened to work out quite nicely. There's also something about someone so blunt and the way I talk, the Aussie accent. No one expects that. you know, you're just quiet. Everyone expects you to be very restrained and conservative, and so that's also a good shake-up, particularly in schools and maybe in retirement villages where people are very on edge about talking to death, giving them something to really take that nervous energy um, away from and have something to focus on for that little while they get over that nervousness is a really helpful thing to have, I've found over the years.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like an icebreaker in itself, and it disarms people a little bit, and they automatically have something to ask you, like I did, like, well, why do you dress like that? And it's a really good opener to talk about the Victorian era and what has changed since that time.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, anything that can go a bit morbid for the kids is very easy in kind of thing. But I mean, the Victorian time was, we like to romanticize it nowadays, but it wasn't, the grand part thing that we think it is today. People tend to romanticize, oh, we'll go back to traditional ways, it'll be lovely. People were dying, constantly. Most kids weren't going to live past the age of 5. You would bury, on average, 3 kids. Death was a very normal part of life and a very common part of life. And now, okay, obviously nowadays we don't want it to be common, and that's fine, but we do want it to be normal, which has sort of been taken away with us over the years. But the Victorian time, they had their mourning rituals, which were very important. We've sort of forgotten. I don't know how it is with you guys over in the US, but in Australia, particularly for the Caucasian community, we've definitely lost a lot of those mourning rituals. We sort of don't see them as important. So you're going through grief without anything to really guide you uh, through it, which can make things so much harder, and the community doesn't come together. Whereas back in the 1800s in ye old England, they did. And okay, there was a bit of excess. Okay, there was a lot of excess, and particularly in the richer areas, but it did help them through it, and it helped them after they've lost so much, which is
Yeah. One thing I think about is the idea of mourning clothing that you referred to, and that the fact that it helps you recognize that you're living a life that's set apart, that has changed from your day-to-day life before because you dress in different clothing now. But it also helps everyone around you to remember that you're mourning. And that's one of the problems I hear all the time. People say, I'm still grieving, but my friends moved on and they forgot. They forgot what I'm going through. But if you see someone who's dressed in mourning clothes, you can't forget that.
yeah, I mean, nowadays so many people get abandoned when they're grieving, particularly if they've lost a partner or a child, or they expect them to, bounce back within a month, kind of thing. It just doesn't work that way. It can go on for years. And like, you're right. The mourning attire was a reminder of how they were. It's also a sign of respect for the deceased, and to a certain extent, it did have its pros and cons, but it did help to have that conversation, or at least remember, okay, this person may not be thinking entirely straight at this time. They're thinking about other things. They're going through a lot of loss and a lot of adjustment, and you sort of need to cater a certain amount to that. And there was a lot more respect for the grieving back then, whereas nowadays it's, oh, go on, get over it, get back to work, you know everything's fine. People die all the time. Off you go. Um, it's just not that easy.
And to be able to have something exterior that shows people that you're grieving without having to explain it over and over again, or tell someone, or say, here's the reason why I'm not laughing right now, or here's the reason why I'm not performing on at my job like I used to because I'm grieving. To not have to explain yourself, but have everyone at the grocery store, everywhere you go, recognize, oh, I understand, I see you, and
That
be
recognize
gentle.
that you may need that support, that help. You don't even have to say it. It's just there. Nowadays, we talk about labels and things like that. Back when I was in the 90s, it was don't label me. Nowadays, it's sort of label you everything. But in this particular case, yeah, no, as a widow or a widower, it was very important. Of course, they had different timing periods for children, for wives, for husbands, and things like that to cater around the society and how the society had to function. Uh, but it says a lot for just those small things. Okay, you have to get an entire new wardrobe, but it was just small things like that that made things easier for the grieving.
Yes, so very true. And one of the things that I was interested in talking to you about are just cultural differences between Australia and the US. And maybe there aren't as many as I imagine or wonder about. I mean, because we're all humans, and some of this behavior, it's just human that we deny death and avoid it. That's kind of part of how we're made, I guess, psychologically. But I know that you're more in touch with US culture probably than I am with Australian culture, but if you could talk about some of those differences.
Yeah, I mean, we hear a lot. There's a lot of Americanization in the media and Hollywood, so we hear about it a lot. Yeah, I mean, obviously, when it comes to grieving and things like that, not so much. But when it comes to funerals, there are some huge differences. Um, Particularly the embalming, we don't do it. It's seen as a little bit odd over here. We have people that can do it for those moments that it's needed, but that's not an automatic kind of thing. Which, from what I hear, it's a big deal over in the US. Caskets is another thing. There's so many lead-lined steel caskets over in the US,
Hmm.
which you pay a fortune for, in under the guise that's going to keep your loved ones safe and protected, and they're not going to change, all that kind of stuff. Whereas over here, we never got into that. Keeping in mind that our funeral industry really only we've had a funeral industry for much longer, but as far as a solid system of it was only around the 40s, as in 1940s. But for you guys, it's a lot older, so you've had a lot more time to get into the swing of it. So back in the 90s for us, one of your companies, SCI, came over to Australia and came over to a lot of other countries because they're having a lot of success at that time, and they tried to take over the funeral industry and buy up all the homes, and very quickly realized that the culture here, which they didn't learn about. They didn't bother being a corporation. They didn't bother to learn about. They thought it was all the same, and it didn't work out. And within 8 months, they fled from the country with it going so badly. And one of those things was the caskets, um,
Mm.
the, and the above ground crypts, which they could sell for huge amounts back in the US. But over here, we're looking at them thinking, what are you talking about? Why would we do that? And that continues on to this day. I guess for you guys, from a lot of particularly viewers that watch our YouTube channel, always keep me up to date about what's going on in different parts of the US, because obviously you've got a lot of states. There's a lot of different things going on here. We
Yeah.
don't have, and we certainly have less people. So there's that problem. So the vaults, the above ground crypts, we don't really do that all that much. The positive for you guys is that because you guys are so much more, and I say this in general, more death avoidant than what Australia is. We still have our problems with that. Don't get me wrong. We have problems with that. Um, but because you are more death avoidant, you're more able to recognize that you are that. So you have so many people pushing back against that, trying to make it more acceptable. And one of the big things that I really like to see is you guys pushing forward with body disposal methods.
Mm.
That, you've got so many different types, and people are trying so many new and innovative ideas, and that just wouldn't work over here. We don't have the population to be
Hmm.
able to sustain a business of that sort and sort of convert people over. Where Aussies are known as laid back, I guess, and we do like to, generally speaking, on a government level, like to see what other countries do first and how it works out. So at the moment, um, the what is it? I've forgotten the word. Composting, human
Yeah,
composting.
yeah, human composting, yes.
Yeah. I mean, we have a lot of people who would love to see that over here, but we're still, our government's still waiting on that. So from that perspective, yes, maybe the US is more death avoidant than Australia, but the backlash to that from within the country and the want to trial these new innovative, great options is huge over there. And you're able to make a profitable business out of perhaps a small percent, but that small percent still equates to quite a high number that you can
Mm.
sustain in business, which is brilliant.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, we have more to push back against, but we have more people. And so that means a bigger number of people who are willing to push back and willing to try to be innovative. So that
Yeah,
really makes sense.
yeah. And you've got states that, again, this is my understanding from what viewers keep telling me, is that you've got different states really have different identities and different things that they'll push for. And because you have so many states, it means there are so many options and so many opportunities to do this, that whole people can band together within that. We're very, there's not much going on in the center, which means we're all around sort of the island,
Hmm.
around the ocean side of things. So it's very much harder to come together and do that kind of thing, which is great, awesome for you guys. And we're looking forward to seeing what you all come out with over the
Well,
next few years.
yeah, that's good. Like, we have the means to, we'll experiment with things. And once we find some solutions, we can export them and hopefully they'll fit well.
Get on that and then convince someone over here how to. We've got people willing to make it happen. We just need a bit of help.
Yeah. What about, I'm curious about the healthcare industry in Australia, which as a big problem here is viewing death as a failure. And I don't know if that's true in Australian healthcare as well.
Yeah. Um, Look, from what I've understood, it's not as big of a problem over here as is with you guys. It's actually something that I'm coming to the US and Canada next year to research within different universities. Is exactly that, how medical students leave with death anxiety and leave with this idea that death is a failure. Or, completely. Obviously, there are times when it's definitely a failure on their part, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So there was a study recently, the past few years, that they put together. They looked at 83 countries. It was between Duke University and National University of Singapore. So they came together and found experts in 83 countries, multiple experts in each country, and came together to find out which country overall had the best death care and the best end of life care. And Australia came fourth. If you're wondering, UK came first. Not sure if they're happy about that or not. I've got a lot of people in the UK that love to complain about their healthcare system, but they've actually done pretty well. Ireland came second, which was lovely. Taiwan. Australia came fourth, along with South Korea and Costa Rica.
Mm.
But as far as the US came 43rd, which was disappointing, and there was a lot of talk about, but the US has got some of the best medical facilities and doctors and all that sort of stuff, and which is absolutely true. People go from all over the world to receive healthcare treatment, but that treatment is to keep people alive. That's what it's known for.
Exactly.
It's unfortunately not known for dying. well. And this report, and I know you've read it, and but it did highlight specifically for the US because everyone was surprised about it. The big problem was the death avoidance within not only the general public but within the medical community as well. And that's a scary thought that your doctor is going to prolong your suffering simply because they don't want you to die, because that would be seen as a failure. Now, of course, this isn't all doctors. Anyone listening, we're not saying that doctors. It just seems to be something that's of higher cause. I guess the other problems, and it wasn't just that. It was the restriction on opioids. Sorry, I know you
Hmm.
guys have a massive crisis with opioids, and a lot of countries have cracked down hard on them, and for good reason. You know, let's not deny that. Unfortunately, with these umbrella sort of laws, they forgot or they weren't aware that for end of life care, they are extremely important as comfort medication. It just and that's a big part in the US is getting access to that. Along with access is it's not a good quality end of life care isn't evenly distributed throughout the country. So access is hard, and the expense. Um, Unfortunately, you guys are known around the world for having an extremely expensive healthcare
Yes.
system. I think everyone knows that, uh, and that can cause huge problems. I mean, if you don't have the excess money, what are you going to do? And people go into massive debt, and so not only do you have, not only are you grieving the loss of your wife, but now you're in massive debt from it, and she may not have died well. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's it's something that can be improved. And like I say, with it being down on that numbers, there are a lot of people pushing back, such as Duke University, which is what I'm going over to study to find out their best practice. But yeah, I guess Australia did better. Yes.
Yeah, I'm curious, like, what is it? What's Australia doing right?
I think we don't have as death avoidant. We're more death neutral. Nothing's really, it's not seen as a positive outcome, but it's not seen as a negative outcome. So we're still not quite there. We definitely still do have doctors that will see death as a failure on all parts, which is very hard. Access for us, um, we're all around the coast. We have less rural areas. We have a lot of rural areas, don't get me wrong, but by comparison to what you guys have, even though you have cities throughout the entire country that you could put a medical hub in, um, it's still not as dispersed. So we are very much closer to a medical hub, which helps with access. Again, the expense, a lot of it is on the government. Um, it's also a lot cheaper. It's subsidized by the government if you have to pay for it. Just the access is, I guess, a bit easier on all fronts. So that's probably, we still have a problem with the pain meds though. That definitely cost us in the
It
rating.
seems like that's really a global problem right now that everywhere that I hear about.
Yeah, I mean, even Denmark, for example, was a country that is extremely well off and doing really well, but they didn't do all that well in the rankings either. For that, and a lot of it was for that reason, the restrictions on
Hmm.
and other meds that were required for comfort care. So yeah, it's so the who has the best death care wasn't necessarily who had the most expensive shiny equipment and the best doctors. It came down to a lot of culture as well, which is very interesting thing, and I'm glad they did take that into account.
Yeah, and one thing that I saw in your notes about it is communication matters, and that sometimes, like one of the downfalls in our US system here is that doctors are busy and they don't always feel they have time and they don't have conversations with their patients and find out their wishes. And everything falls apart if that happens. If we can't have these conversations and plan ahead and talk about it, then it doesn't matter if how great the system is. Even if it were better, we still can't get the care to people at the right time and get them what they want.
I mean, there's a lot of doctors, both over here and over your way, that will avoid it simply because they don't know how to talk about it, or they simply don't want to, and they send out a nurse or something to do that. Surgeons, for instance, are known probably as some of the worst offenders in that case of, well, someone died on the table, we'll just send a nurse out to go do it because that's not in my job description. There's a certain amount of ego that goes with that as well. And but it's also down to family members who don't know what their dying person, dying loved one wants because they didn't bother talking to them about it. They were so awkward about it. I'm going, well, that's great, but now you don't know, and you're going to live with that guilt of not knowing. Wouldn't it have been easier to have those conversations with
Oh,
them?
oh yeah, it's so true. It's pervasive. I mean, I'm sure it is an issue everywhere, like we were saying, because it's a human issue of having a fear of death. But uh, to me, it would make sense that our healthcare providers are the people who are not afraid of talking about death, who could bring up the conversation and encourage their patients and tell them, like, you really need to discuss this with your family and actually take the lead on it. But it feels to me like we're a long way from making inroads there.
Yeah, as far as physicians, we've got a lot of work. I wanted to go do a research project over your way to find out best practice in it. We have a long way to go, but we also need, like I say, we need families to step up with advanced care directives to talk about them and then to be able to advocate for them. And I think that was another thing that the report came out, was that doctors are still seen as this authority, this knowing all being kind of thing that you don't question, uh, which isn't true to a certain extent, because they're still human. They still have human fears. They still have human ambition and all those other things. So you need to know with 100% certainty what your dying loved one would want, so you can advocate and not question yourself. Um, and that, should you have to do that hard, and in some cases, really forcefully, you shouldn't have to, but sometimes you do with the medical staff, and I've certainly seen that a lot. Is the guilt and the frustration that loved ones will have after their loved one has died, of, why was it so difficult to get them to listen to me, get the doctors to listen to me. The nurses were listening,
Mhm.
but the doctors clearly didn't want to or couldn't. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's so interesting. It's so ironic, I guess, that here in the US, we are dealing with a lot of issues with burnout and compassion fatigue in the medical system. And I don't know if that's true there, but I believe the thing that could help with that the most is if doctors were able to come to terms with death and dying and see death as part of the life cycle. And when doctor, what a futile effort if you're trying to save someone who is just not going to survive. And if any death is a failure, you're ultimately going to fail with every single patient. And that to me is insanity in a way. And no wonder doctors burn out with carrying that kind of load. So ironically, we could make it better for everyone if we could just move the needle on these conversations happening.
I mean, when the medical industry took over, um, for us, it was, back in the 30s and 40s, when, the war was, war advances bring medical advances, as they said on MASH back in the day. And it's so true. And now we think that medicine can save everyone, regardless of what's going on. So there's pressure from family often, and in, again, regrettably, over your way, suing people who do anything that you don't like seems to be a very pervasive issue, and doctors don't want their names in the headlines saying that they lost a patient. So that would put them in bad stance within their profession. But I guess it's also understandable how they end up thinking that way. You don't go into a medical degree for so many years to, if you ask a child, what does a doctor do? They say to help people, to fix people.
Hmm.
And that's what that training is about. So I understand how they got there and why it is so hard then to pivot, because you're not an engineer and going, okay, well now we're going to learn how to blow a building up. It just doesn't happen. You learn how to build them and how to build them successfully and make sure they stay up regardless. So same with doctors. So I understand how they get there, but we do need to now backtrack a bit and try and understand that we're not these immortal beings, and there's something positive about that as well, that our suffering can end at some point. Uh, yeah, I think doctors do need to be aware, and it needs to be from the very beginning, because a lot of these people that go in to become a doctor go in quite young, and they go in and still when their brain is not isn't completely developed, and they still have that I'm immortal, I will survive anything sort of mentality. And then you get role models of doctors who are death avoidant and or who see death as a failure, and they copy that and emulate that because that's who they aspire to be. So it's finding a way to put a stop to that somewhere, but finding out which link in the chain do you break, or can you
Hmm.
break without breaking the healthcare system as such. It's how you do that is difficult. Mind you, there are quite a few universities that seem to be making a great impact, in particular over your way, which is awesome, and hopefully it takes off. But there are also some universities that are very steadfast in their ways, are very conservative, very traditional, and are not going to change because they have the name that they really don't need to.
Yeah, yeah, so true. Well, you make a good point that medical students being young are impressionable. And if we had the right role models available to those students, it wouldn't be that hard to help them become more death aware and more death positive. We could do it. They're ripe for it at that time in their career. We just need the right teachers.
That absolute. I mean, that would be the probably the perfect way to do it is to role model, because you can tell. We all know you try to tell a younger person something, there's going to be a pushback. But if you could role model that, that would be great.
Hmm.
It's just finding enough. And also, if you ask someone new to any field, who do you want to be your role model? It's going to be the one that's the most successful, and how they define success could go in many different directions. It could be who gets the most patients, who gets the most money. So you're also relying on these people to choose the right role models, which is such a tough way of doing things. If we could have, you know, if there was a way to have um, senior staff, I mean, you could grade them on their death acceptance levels, and then say,
Yes.
okay, you can be mentors. And uh, is that going to happen? No, because we're running out of staff. Like you say, the staff burnout is
Hmm.
horrendous at the moment. We had problems before COVID, but every healthcare community in every country is still running on fumes after that. So
Yes, so
how
true.
police, yeah, don't know.
Well, I'm curious about, do you have the death doula movement happening in Australia?
Yeah, we do to a certain extent. Do the general public know about it? No.
Hmm.
Well, there are people that want to do it, but it's also not certified. There's no registry, no regulation. My understanding is the same over your
Hmm.
way, and that's a cause for concern. I have heard positive and negatives about about it. Um, it's not taking off as much. Again, it's sort of hearing about it from what you guys are doing, and then we've gone, oh, that's an option. See, it's always good to have the innovative US peoples that can give us ideas. We'll then run with it as well.
Ideas to build on, and hopefully you'll be able to see all of our mistakes, whatever they are, and learn from those.
Hey, even if we can just get the ideas, it would be brilliant.
Yeah. Well, I talk to death doulas here every day who are in more rural communities who say they're having a hard time finding acceptance where they live as well. That because it takes people a while to open up to this idea. It sounds strange in a way that, what are you talking about? Someone who accompanies you while you're dying, it doesn't necessarily make sense to people.
Yeah, and I think for for a lot of people, if you say you've got, say, a birth doula, there's a different aura, there's a different feel about that than midwife. And unless you are that way inclined, you're going to find it a bit difficult to take on. And death doula, having the same name attached to it, also seems to be coming up against those hurdles. Not only that, you've got the public that are death avoidant, and from what I've noticed, a lot of death doulas don't seem to be able to explain in a way that the public, who has never heard of them, can actually take in enough to, on a practical level, what is it you do? Um, and the vagueness, I think, tends to put people off quite a bit.
Yeah, that's very true. And it is because it's very eclectic, because there are lots of different types of death doulas who specialize in different things. So that makes it even harder to grasp for
Yeah.
people.
We've had some, I've met some that are brilliant. If we could clone them, we would. But I've also met some that insist on their way or the highway, as far as no pain meds, no anti-nausea meds, no,
Wow.
insistent. This is the only way, and because the patient, client, or however you want to call them, hasn't really understood what a death doula is, they don't know whether they can back out of it or not. There's this um, certain amount of confidence that a death doula may go in with. So it can, because there's no registry as well, it can go either way. I've
Hmm.
found that's our big problem at the moment, because as soon as you get one bad one in the press, it's game over
Yeah.
for
Yeah. That's very true.
um, so I mean, registration is over your way. Is registration sounding like something that's going to happen?
Well, yeah, there a group of doulas came together and created a type of certification, though I mean it isn't anything official, but it is sort of agreed upon a curriculum of what people should learn to become a death doula. And if they take training that provides those things, they can be called certified. So at least there's some way of finding out that they've had adequate training in a number of acceptable areas. So that at least is the very beginning. But
That's it's definitely needed. Along with police clearances and everything else, it definitely needs to be, to see if they've got the right mentality for it as well. And I always, because I do get asked, what do you think about this place that provides training? What do you think about this place? And it, maybe be a volunteer in a hospice first. Maybe see someone actually die.
mhm,
A lot of them haven't. They just think it's this good idea, and I'll it can be my full time job. Firstly, it's not a full time job. It's barely a part time job for most people, especially over here. We just don't have the numbers. Um, but yeah, that's
well, it's a work in progress. It's in a state of transition and probably will be for decades in a way as we try to get our society to evolve and change.
the death positive community, or however we want to phrase it, is sort of moving faster in that way,
Hmm.
and they're training themselves up. But we need more people to stop in that part and start training up the public, because there's no point us getting, having all these great ideas and then not having done the basics within the public.
Yeah. And that's actually where you come in. I want to talk to you about what you're doing. And I love that you call your work taboo education because you just put it right out there. There's no elephant in the room. It's right out here. Here it is. I talk about the taboo thing, and people have to accept that if they want to come and work with you.
Yeah, it's education about a taboo topic. I learned very early on that being frank is probably going to work out better for an Australian community. We There does seem to be in the American system a very soft talking about it. A very You don't make jokes about it. You know, never make jokes about death. Never you sort of cover things up in many layers without the straight talking part. And I see that on a lot of YouTube channels that talk
Hmm.
about American perspective. And that works for some people, and people like that sort of coddling part. But how much there's actually getting through is a different story. The problem is for us over in Australia, that doesn't work. Um, we will be very frank. We are very sarcastic people. So they need an educator that will continue in that form. And by making jokes, and again, it's sort of, again, going back to MASH, they had a lot of great quotes back then. Um, you know, their team, when they were talking about making the show about the war, and if you're younger and listening, it was about the war back in Korea.
Hmm.
It was never make fun. You know, they were never to write jokes about the suffering and the carnage of war, but the absurdity around it, absolutely, you could make fun of, and that's sort of the angle that I come at it as well. Someone actually dying and realizing my life's about to end, that's not funny. But some of the absurd things that go on around what we do, yeah, we can laugh at that because it is kind of weird. So that comes out. So for us, that's how we choose to go in on it. We do it age appropriate, and we do it in a professional manner and all that. But it's something different, and it also seems to be, judging by our YouTube analytics, it does seem to be something that a lot of Americans and Canadians also seem to um, appreciate.
Yeah, so tell me what you're offering, like through YouTube. You have a YouTube channel for one thing, and you film videos for the channel.
Yep, we do. So we've got a YouTube channel. I wanted to make sure that everyone who wanted to know about it could know all this information, because some people can't afford a consultation, some people can't turn up to a workshop, some people are in rural areas. So I wanted to make that available. And the idea for the channel, before we get into my actual company, but the idea for the channel was not to go down one route. Like you see a lot of educators, we are the funeral, talk about funerals, or we talk about hospice, we talk about that. And I didn't want to go down that route, mainly because I get bored talking about the same thing over and over again. But also, I wanted to come at it from looking at death and dying from every possible angle that you could come at, because one of those angles will hit someone's mind and make them think. But and you could go down the morbid route, you could go down the historical route, the psychological route, practical, whatever. So I wanted to give people as many ways to think about it as possible, because otherwise you end up just thinking about it in the one way without getting creative about what you can do, and how you can think about it. So that's what we did for YouTube. So that's out there, Taboo Education. But as far as a company, we do guest speaking. That's primarily what we do. We go to schools, universities, retirement villages, whoever needs us to talk
Mhm.
about any dying matter. Um, but we also do individual online consultations. If you're in the city where I am, then we can go do personal. And we talk to people from all over the world, with these online consults to help them out with whatever death matter they require. We're very broad, in what we want, because everyone has a different thing and they don't know who to ask. It's like, well, do I book in with a psych, but then I'm there for like, you know, 5, 6 sessions?
Mhm.
You know, I just want to know this one piece of particular information about it, which is where you come in.
And I noticed, I saw that you have a program for funeral homes, and I was really curious about that. What education you provide to funeral homes?
So I worked out probably about 10 years ago now. I know quite a few funeral directors. And I saw things weren't quite going as well as maybe the young people who want to go into the industry seem to think. So obviously, I'm not talking to them about death and dying because they already know about that. I'm talking from the mental health perspective, and it's
Mm,
the burnout, the compassion fatigue, the relationship breakdown is a big problem because you're working on call all hours. You're missing weddings and birthdays, and you can't really talk about your job unless your partner's a funeral worker as well, because you see some horrific things you don't want to put that on your partner. So you kind of shut down that level, but that creates a sort of unease between the relationship. So that was a problem for some in other countries. Social isolation is a problem. A lot of people don't want to be associated with a funeral, someone who works with the dead. So, I mean, we have a little bit of that. You know, people go, oh, you're a funeral director. That's a bit creepy. Why would you want to do that? But in other countries, Japan, for instance, it can be very socially isolating. So there's yeah, and also the trauma. If you see a dead child who's been maimed, it's especially if you've got kids, that's gonna weigh on you. Yeah, so there's quite a few things. So we talk to them about how to avoid these sort of things. What do you do for, you don't let burnout build up, compassion fatigue build up. It's going to happen to a certain extent in that field, but what do you do to combat it? Or, what do you put in place? What self-care do you put in place? We try not to use self-care because that has been overused.
mhm, mhm.
And if you are a very straight talking person, people don't want to come at it from that angle. But yeah, relationship breakdown is the big one that then goes on to have so many other problems. That's what we found over here. I don't know about you guys over there. What do you know? What sort of issues are affecting your funeral?
Uh, I don't, I would imagine some of the same issues. And I was going to say, I don't honestly know anyone who's reaching out to them and doing the same kind of mental health support that you're doing, which sounds really important. But there probably is someone here. I just don't
Yeah,
know.
I started doing it from Singapore. Actually, I was asked to come over there and do it. I didn't know it originally start over here in
Huh.
Australia.
Oh, interesting.
And they've made in the past 10 years, Singapore has made some great strides in their end of life care, their funeral care. Just incredible the change that has
Hmm.
happened. If anyone wants to look at a very positive and a very solid and meaningful change that has come from the top down, that's a good one to go look into as well.
That's actually really encouraging to hear about that it's possible because sometimes it feels so challenging and so big to try to change all these entrenched patterns. But it's encouraging to know that they've been successful somewhere.
I mean, admittedly, they are smaller. Their governance style is different and probably more able to come together and make those changes. But small changes, add up to big changes. And if we could even get local governments on board, and then start from there and sort of make it a widespread kind of thing. That's certainly what's been happening over here. Is finding those communities. Nothing happens over here in Western Australia. Let's put it this way: we're on
Uh,
the west coast. So if you're in if you're listening from the US, we're on the side that no one really travels to. If you're going to come to Australia, you're going to go to Melbourne and Sydney, and that's all on the east coast. It takes a long time for anything, whether it be goods or ideas, to here. We are the most isolated capital city, and that's for good reason. So, um, yeah. But as far as ideas and that, most things will come out of over there and then move their way over here. So the fact that even I'm over here on my side of the country talking about it shows it is moving. just going to take a bit of a time to get to the center of Australia.
Yes, yeah, that makes sense. Well, and I know also you speak to schools, and I was curious what age group you speak to, and then what do you talk about, and how is it received when you do presentations to students?
Most of ours are in high school. We have done the occasional in primary school as well. High school over here would be year 7 to year 12, so that's about 11 years old to 18 years old at the moment. So most of it's there. We spent many years just trying to get into schools
Hmm.
because most schools are reactionary to something happened. When their students take their own life, there's a car crash or something like that, then they will react to it. There's no really proactive stuff happening. So we wanted to go in and say, look, we can talk about death, whatever, from many different issues. We can include it in your curriculum in a certain way. So if we don't talk about history, we can talk about history, how the war, because you're already talking about World War One and Two. We may as well come in for a day and show how that impacted the funeral industry and the medical industry and how that impacted death within things. We look at, for a lot of schools have religious education, depending on which school they are at. And a lot of them talk about ethics, which we come in and talk about voluntary assisted dying and the pros and cons, the for and against that from different perspectives. So that's always a fun one as well. I mean, it's a difficult topic, but it's a fun one to work with young people and hear them for the first time and hear them they kind of change what suffering means, because for a lot of them they've only seen it on social media. They've seen war and stuff like that, but they haven't had anything that's really come home. The problem with talking about death within schools is that they are so concerned about what the parents are going to think.
Hmm.
And a lot of parents don't want to talk to their kids about death, which is the exact reason that we are having to go in to do it. Because if we can break it for one generation, then that generation will start talking to their kids when they grow up and sort of thing. So we've got to break it somewhere. But schools are so scared about what parents are going to think, how they're going to react, that they often don't, and they will put their foot down and say, no, we don't want you to come in. But it's a big problem. Schools are talking about mental health. That's the big
Hmm.
thing, right? Talking about mental health. And it is proven that if a young person or even an adult has higher death literacy rates and a greater understanding of death, their mental health tends to be better, and they are less likely to be impulsive and things like take their own life or risky, train surfing and things like that, risky behaviors, they are less likely to do because they understand exactly what that would mean if something happened to them, rather than just this concept um, of it. So some schools understand that, and we've gotten through, and some don't. We've also come at it from the angle of abuse, from
Hmm.
um, sort of a domestic violence kind of angle, which a lot of young people end up in. Because again, social media, we've got a lot of toxicity going on at the moment, and teaching them about death sort of really does bring it home to them what that could actually look like. Um, and also, the manipulation from a lot of young people, a lot of abusers, even adults, but a lot will, go on to say, oh, I will. They're broken up with me, and so I will attempt to take my own life, and then there'll be this romanticized meeting again at the hospital bedside, and he'll say he loves me and all that. There's nothing romanticized about your rotting corpse, so to speak. There's nothing romanticized about being in a vegetative state and slowly atrophy and things like that. So the more they know, the more they can get in their head about a realistic look of it, the less likely they are to do things. And that's proven. So with schools, it's taken a while, but we are getting there.
Yeah. Well, I really like that approach of using the lens of death and applying it to lots of other subject areas, because even if schools are talking about finance, you can talk about the need for estate planning, and when
Yeah,
someone dies, what happens to their things, and how, when
it
their
is.
grandparents die, what will happen. And
Yeah, like I said, I can push it into any fake leaves subject that they've got.
Yeah.
It's pervasive. It goes into so many parts of your life that you wouldn't even think of. So we can do that. It's just whether they have time in their curriculum and things like that. But also coming at it from many, many different areas. Firstly, I don't get bored because, it's people's, I say, I'm a death educator. People automatically assume, oh, you talk about wills and you talk about grief. And if I had to talk about that every day, I would be bored out of my mind. Obviously, we do talk about that, but keeping things fresh is great for young people because they haven't heard it before. If you keep coming at something from one direction, and in schools it is usually coming at it from a mental health direction, it's been drilled into them over and over, they're not going to listen, they're going to tune out. They're also going to think it'll never happen to me. So if you come at it from a slightly different perspective and not as directors that sort of permeate into the back of their minds, sometimes that's really helpful.
Yes, yes, definitely. And really not just schools, but throughout society. I think that's those of us who want to educate people about death, we have to get used to meeting people where they are, finding out what are they concerned about, and then how do I work death into that particular topic for them.
And it's harder. You've got to be creative about it.
It's
You've got
true.
to step back and think, okay, what's the current thing? What's their problem? And then find out how to put it through the grinder effectively, and then come out with something that's going to work for them.
Yeah, exactly.
It's difficult. It's very difficult.
Yeah. Well, you are clearly creative. I see it, just listening to you and talking to you about what you've done.
That must be it.
Well, do you have anything coming up? I know, so you do offer some group, uh, individual consultations, some group meetings, and do you have like courses or workshops that you offer online?
We will be starting them up next year. Like I say, we've got a massive research project going on behind the scenes at the moment. So we will be coming over to the US, Canada, UK, Ireland next year. At the moment, we don't have any workshops, but we are putting them in place. But at the moment, yes, if you want to get in contact, you've got any death and dying, anything, it could be anything, not even the basics, whatever. You can give us a email on our website for our individual consult. But we're also open to doing online webinar workshops for groups internationally as well. I mean, if you want to pay me to fly out, I'll gladly go do it in another country. But yeah, we're certainly open to covering anything that people need, any topic that people need.
Well, that's fantastic. And the website is tabooeducation.com. That's right. Okay. Well, oh, Samantha, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. It's been really interesting. I love hearing about what's happening in Australia. Proud of you guys for being number 4. Well, we're down here at number 43 on that list. But
Yeah, the innovation.
it's true. We have the hope. We have the hope and possibility of change because there is innovation happening. And so that's encouraging. That's a good thing.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, Karen. I really much appreciate that. And thank you to all your lovely listeners. And get in contact with me if you need me.
Definitely. And it's wonderful. I love being connected around the world because that's the other way that we keep moving the needle is by just bringing all our good thoughts and our innovation together and supporting one another. So I'm really happy we've been able, yeah.
That motivation to keep going, even if you see someone on the other side of the world that's pushing it as well.
So
We all need.
true. So true. Well, thank you for giving me your time and we'll stay in touch.
We will.
Okay.
Thank you, Karen. Have a good day.
All right. You too.